Minimum of that as well. We are thankful, but people are asking, when is the full implementation of 30% reduction coming to effect? That is a probing question. I'm trying to look also at this task force that was put up by the president, the presidential task force on, checking the energy sector, which was chaired by John Ngumi. And some of the clauses here that maybe I can read out for you some of them here. It says the task force assessed and reviewed determination clauses in PPIs, that is PPAs, I should say, between KPLC and the power producers selected on the basis of mode of procurement that is competitive and feed-in tariff type of technology, that is thermal, renewable, and hydros. Size of plants, large above 50 megawatts and small, less than 10 megawatts. The selection largely represents all the signed PPAs. The following was established. The determination may occur in case of delay in achieving the effective date before the long stop effective date or such later date as the seller, in its sole discretion, may decide. PPAs provide for extension of a target effective date with no limitation, resulting in PPAs taking an inordinate time from that initially envisaged to materialize into fully operational plans. Termination only occurs at the default of either party, and no party can terminate at their convenience. Upon termination, the timelines for payment of a transfer, that is a compensation amount, varies from 30, 60, or 90 days depending on the specific PPA. In the event of termination due to the seller's default, the seller is required to pay to KPLC only direct costs of procuring the capacity for the remainder of the team. KPLC is required to pay any termination payments in foreign currency. And it goes on and on. I can't just read all of it as well. But just going through the particular contract that we had between Kenya Power and the PPAs at the end of the day, do you find it to be a bit binding? Gito Wanaina or Exxon Iraqi?
Yeah, I think it's something interesting when you look at the power. And I want to pick from what Exxon pointed out, that is a publicly quoted company. So I'm expecting some returns. What it's doing is you're pushing certain institutions to go producing their own power, like EBL. They are almost getting 10 megawatts out in the market. So that has an impact in terms of what most companies are going to do. Really, the trend is to not depend on this power. But the other fact is that what you have led is it's a worrying kind of a situation. How can you go into that kind of a contract with the independent power producers? And as he says, the economics beat project. We have actually almost have 3,500 megawatts in the grid now. We had targeted 5,000, but we have gone significant. Since independent has percentage we are going into. I think to me the biggest challenge we have here, and by the way, we are among the most poor countries in terms of electricity access in Africa. Egypt 100%. No wonder the products are cheaper there, and us 70%. I went early December 2019 to Egypt. And we bought a shoe with somebody, and this guy could not believe that kind of price they were selling the shoe. And we translated to Kenya, and he was like, "You mean you can buy that? It's so expensive." What's the point here? When the poor is on the higher side, then you have a problem with terms of manufacturing. But I think the challenge here is, and I think I hear my colleagues going to other power producers, but we need to compress these three. We have KenGen, which is producers. We have Ketraco, and then we have Kenya Power. I'm not quite sure we have all these layers. Why can't you have one person managing that? And the area of, because energy, electricity plays a big part in terms of manufacturing. And that's why even in terms of goods, it's expensive. But I think the way to go is get rid of these independent power producers. As you say, you find there's certain things you are being charged. And all this goes to independent power producers. The moment we get these animals out of the way, then we'll see the price coming down. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves very strongly, not even saying who are owners of these independent power producers? And he's just asking, are we really getting the picture of that we really want to reduce the power? That is important. As we even get into terms of growing our economy, the power becomes a very important point. So the contracts, and God forbid, where do you go in those kind of contracts? Anywhere in the world. And you are paid in foreign currencies. Even look at the currency fluctuations. Now we are talking about almost 120 Kenya shillings to a dollar. So even peg now how much we had locked at the start, even that cost of currency fluctuation is really eats into that. But I think the moment we address these independent power producers, the moment we address these three, because the three institutions, to me, there are a lot of inefficiencies. How one company deal with power energy in this country? If you look at most countries which have actually very reliant power producer, it's run by one company. And the other thing is the reliance. How much goes to waste? I think we need to bring that in terms of really looking for this country. The president's idea was great, and in terms that you're really addressing it like manufacturing, you're addressing the household, the last mile. But in terms of implementation, and that's what the biggest challenge you have in this country, how do we get that really down to the letter? And I think that's a challenge you need. I suppose, or I think, the independent power producers are probably the ones calling the strength than anything else. Yeah.
Well, which brings to question the aspect of our negotiating skills as a country, Kiprono Kitoni, because this is not the first time that we've seen Kenya really bungling. You know, it's a negotiating opportunity. We had also the maritime dispute between Kenya and Somalia, where we're given to understand, you know, people who went or who are at the table trying to, you know, broker that particular peace between Kenya and Somalia in regard to this maritime dispute. They really bungled it at the end of the day. And this goes to show, looking at such contracts, on how it's really skewed as well, heavily on the IPPs, as it were, or was it just deliberate at the end of the day? Do you think, and you've been also the chair of the Kenya Chambers of Commerce and Industry at the end of the day, and also the vice president of the World Federation of Chambers and Commerce, which you still are, you can tell us, when it comes to negotiating, who do we bring on the table? Do we bring our finest minds on the table so that they may be able to skillfully negotiate for this country, that we're not really taking advantage of on that particular table at the end of the day?
Let me start by saying, you know, that the challenge that we have in the energy sector in Kenya is as a result of blatant rent seeking. I mean, the whole existence of the IPPs and the rates that they charge, I mean, ranging right from the 90s to date, I mean, it is criminal. I mean, it borders on criminality. I mean, if you're charging 50 cents for a diesel power generator to supply to the national grid, when our cheapest source, geothermal sources in Olkaria, are producing at $6 which is 10 times. It's a scale of 1 to 10. So where does that variance go to? I think for me, I can say with no fear of contradiction that as a country, we've actually played lip service to corruption. Many people have been vested with that responsibility of fighting with corruption, but many times the political will has not been there to really tackle this dragon that continues to pull this country down. So entering into contracts like that, such as the ones we have seen with the IPPs, and I really want to give a special commendation to my friend John Ngumi, because he really tried very hard, and he even went to a step up to the point where they have recommended that they have a meeting with all the IPPs to renegotiate and revise the exit clauses in terms of the contract between the IPPs and the Kenya Power and Lighting Company. We haven't yet heard what the outcome of that engagement was, but I think myself that it should be treated even as close to treason as possible. I mean, really, you cannot do that to a nation that is aspiring to move and resolve issues for, you know, the very many poor people out there. And the cost of power today becomes a huge burden. We cannot have industry to scale. We cannot create sufficient employment. Enterprises are not profitable, all because of a result of a few people sitting in a room and charging rates that in the 90s was in fashion, and have been able to carry on that criminal enterprise for 20, 30 years. So for me, I think honestly, at points like this, governments need to take very firm, very hard decisions. I mean, and if you look at a country like Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew did not transform Singapore by taking easy options. He did it by taking the hardest options.
Indeed. Which brings, Bilokeru, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to add
Sure,
that, you know, that task force, of course, they did their work. But including, by the way, recommending that the tariffs should be reduced from the current average of about 20 cents, 21 cents, 22 cents US dollars to about 14 cents, 0.14 US cents. I think this is based on the average globally in the world. People don't pay more than, 0.13 cents per kilowatt. Now, but the point I want to bring out, which in addition to what Kiprono said, is that our total generation of power now is about 3,000, over 3,000 by the way, over 3,000 megawatts. And our demand has not gone beyond 2,000. And Kenyan alone, which is geothermal, and which is the cheapest, is nearly 2,000 now. You don't actually need the IPPs. Mm-hmm. So it's all about what Kiprono said. It's all about business. The government, of course, sent a commission to do these things, but no, they don't want to implement the decisions of the recommendations. So I think it's not commitment. It's all politics. When the president says, I'm going to make it 30% reduction, and he doesn't do it because he knows who owns those companies. Everything is in the report by those guys. They really gave all the information and everything that the government needs to do to address that matter. But it's not being implemented. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, which brings to question, if we go back to, I think the 90s there, where the country was subjected to, power rationing all the time. And this was pegged to, the idea that the hydro, the hydro level had actually gone down. So we didn't have sufficient water actually to drive the hydroelectricity at the end of the day. Looking at that particular moment and now, do you think this, as I've mentioned, was also a chaos theory or chaotic theory that, the scholars they normally say? It was just artificial crisis that was created for people to benefit, that we may be entering into this particular contracts. If we may remember by then, I think that the used to power rationing was from 8 to around 7 o'clock the whole day, so there was no activity because people now didn't have the source of power, as it were. Bilokeru. And this is when these contracts were entered into with the IPPs.
Yes, although there are a number of contracts that have been done in the last 10 years.
Okay.
Some of the IPPs have just been put up or completed less than 5 years ago. I mean, it's not something about 90s only, but the trend is the same. Create a perception that there is a shortage of power, and so bring in an IPP, with a sovereign guarantee, and that the government will foot the bill if there is no uptake by KPC and so forth. So it's deliberate. It's not... you're in a situation where today Kenyan alone generates nearly 50% of power demand, that is more than 50% of the demand that is required. Then when you add the hydros and all the others, geothermal, and that's geothermal, then you add the hydros and the other, you don't even need the IPPs. But I agree that these things were not accidental. They are planned. You see, it's part of that theory. You create a situation where there are power outages, a situation where, it's drought, you're told there's no generation, or there's no adequate generation of power. But it's not really the reality. Today, that's not the reality. Today, geothermal alone is adequate. Kenyan alone is generating enough power. But when you're buying in such a way that there's an uptake of 100% from the IPPs, which are expensive. And so the cost, ultimate cost that is passed to the consumer becomes more. So I agree, it's a criminal enterprise, and this is something that, the state needs to do something. So all this, sending the OP there, government ministers, and, that's not going to be a solution to this thing. I mean, where the challenge is. Let's address this thing professionally.
And Kenjan, I can see Prof, you have to say something before my question?
Very interesting discussion, and I like the way Bill Kero put it about vested interests. Three things to comment. One of them is, if you remember when we came with the IPPs, that's when, as you put it, we had rationing, we had drought, and there was very little power. So the negotiators took full advantage. Remember what happened when we were looking for PPEs during COVID, the money people made.
Yes, yes.
So anytime there's a crisis and you go to negotiate, you need to be very careful. And you should have said it more clearly that we lack serious negotiators in this country. If you look at the way IPP was framed, I'm not a lawyer, but I can clearly see that it favors IPP. So we need serious negotiators anytime there's something that serious. Number two, you want, my colleague says that we should BADO, KenGen, Kenya Power, KETRACO together. That is how things are still in South Africa, but it is worse. So I think KenGen and the rest can remain separate, but at each stage of power production, distribution, and so on, there should be competition. We have very many people producing power, IPPs, independent power producers, and so on. But when it comes to transmission, we have a monopoly. When it comes to distribution, there's a monopoly. So let's bring competition in each of those places. My dream is that power in this country should be like airtime. Anybody can afford airtime. And you can see what has happened to innovation in ICT sector because of availability of airtime. So if power was easily available to industrialize, to people like you and me, you can imagine how this country will move forward. I don't know why we don't see such a simple fact.
Indeed. Prof.
And it's interesting the point he's raising, and my mind goes to if, and it's interesting that everybody can afford airtime, and you look at the structure of the company landing the airtime, it's very different. There are some companies within government state, what we call state corporations. Perhaps we need to take back as government in terms of managing them, and bring people perhaps like you get those like Safaricom, those kind of companies, and they manage the power in this country. And of course the government comes very strongly in terms of, you have CA, Communication Authority, regulating the industry. Why can't you have this company running this power in this business, but there's a regulator there? Now, the point here is that you bring efficiency. At times you look at Kenya Power. Today, I don't know that we had this guy resigned, now I don't know, we have the lady there or something. And you look at the whole thing of messing up with the meters. I live in an estate. You're like, when is the power going to go off? Even today. And I think having as somebody in business, somebody in manufacturing, that kind, it's not even predictable in terms of production. And there's nothing in any economy than predictability. You can predict even what's good. And therefore, I think we have to bite the bullet. I hear Bill is right, Kip. We have to bite, and Kip is putting very strongly that it probably look like a sabotage. And I think it is. We have to bite the bullet and get the independent power producers out of the way. Then you see now, really, as Bill is pointing out, 3,000, almost 500 megawatts. The demand is actually not as that. So you're supplying more. In basic economics, 1,000 economics tells if the demand is high, then you produce more. If there's more, then the price goes down. So that's a basic economics. But at one time I had the opportunity to ask the lady economist within the KenGen, and she gave me the whole concept is because of certain things they have to meet for independent power producers. I think the bottom line, that's what we have. And John Gumi did a fantastic job. He talked about renegotiating those contracts. I think it's a state machinery now to make it happen. Bottom line is that.
And if we may approach now the aspect, if we look at KenGen and how they have had such a glowing success in Ethiopia, drilling, a geothermal drill there of almost 3,000 meters in depth, which is surpassing the 2,700 that they've ever done before. This is for the Ethiopia Electricity Company way there in Ethiopia. Why are we not really going the geothermal way? And we have the resources here. We've been endowed as a country. And why have we been navel-gazing on hydroelectricity, as it were? Can we talk about diversification right now? We know also the Garissa solar plant, as it is right now, is generating 2% into the energy grid in the country, which is an energy mix from that particular solar farm in Garissa. Could we also expand and try and get more megawatts from solar, as it were, at the end of the day? Or are we bound with this particular contract that is, an albatross on our necks, that we have to work with it, I don't know until when? Because we don't know even the exit clauses when this particular IPP's contracts will end at the end of the day. Kip.
Yeah, I think the Debal, I want to go back to, let's start with the answer. What is the purpose of energy? I mean, the government created a short-term, the Jubilee government in 2012 created a short-term objective of producing 5,000 megawatts of power, of energy. And they went a good way. I mean, we are at 3,000 megawatts. But then the important and the real question that we need to ask is, why has there been no corresponding uptake of this power? I mean, the whole purpose of our 5,000 megawatt energy creation, and by the way, 5,000 is not very much. If you compare it to South Africa's 60,000 megawatts, it's not very much. But then it was a big step forward from the sub 1,000 that we had between 2000 and 2010. The question is, why has Kenya been unable to attract industrial investment? I think we need to look at other macroeconomic issues, things that are standing in the way between ourselves and economic prosperity. And these are things like the cost of capital. These are things like the legal and regulatory regime. I think one of the unintended consequences of devolution, and I've talked about it many times, is that we've created a very huge overhead structure in this country. And for that reason, then the Kenya Revenue Authority, or KRS as it will be called soon, has literally gone out of its way to ensure that every last coin that enterprise makes goes into the government coffers. So it becomes almost impossible to run a successful enterprise in this country. I think for me, we need to look at energy as just one of the critical enablers of economic prosperity. So we could have this target to generate 5,000 megawatts. We could even go ahead and succeed in generating that amount of energy. But then why is it that more industries are still likely to go to Ethiopia to set up as opposed to come into Kenya? Why is it that we are not able to even create a balance of trade surplus with our neighbors like Uganda and Tanzania, despite the fact that we have better infrastructure, we have access to the ocean? So you see, we need to ask ourselves hard questions fundamentally about the economy. And it is my prayer that whoever takes power on August the 8th, Jubilee has done what it has done, particularly on infrastructure. Driving here this morning, it was delightful to see the highway networks that we are now starting to see being put to use. But then that's not going to answer the question of what are we going to do with our large labor force that is not deployed. And I see myself a short-term social and economic crisis if we don't come up with a solution of how we are going to make enterprise successful for people to be gainfully employed.
Right. Bill Okero.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Kibrono's statement. I think I remember in the last AGM of Kenya Power last year, the chairman telling the shareholders that they are going to renegotiate the IPPs. Because one of the challenges, by the way, is most of those IPPs are denominated in dollar and euro, and they have a very high internal rate of return, which if you don't meet, KPC has to. This is the reason why we have this very expensive power. But I think we are repeating this thing. The issue is the government knows better than each of us here where exactly the problem is with Kenyan Power and Lighting, costs, and the issue is the vested interest, and nobody wants to do anything about it. It's simple. I don't think there's any other solution to this thing other than addressing that. It reminds me of the Anglo leasing contracts. You remember the government saying, we can't cancel these contracts and so forth, and there are commitments, so we have to continue paying. But it's better to cancel a contract and pay some costs today than to continue burdening your entire economy with a cost that is going to affect the cost of living, of everyone, and in fact, and bring more challenges to the society in the long term. So I think, why give Kenya Power and Lighting billions in bailout when you can spend the same billions to cancel those contracts? So so it's not really about lack of an opportunity to do that. It's about lack of a will. There is no political will to terminate these contracts because they belong to people who are connected to power. That's basically it.
So there's no political will. Let's finalize it. We finalize the discussion on the cost of electricity with you, Professor Exene-Raki.
It's coming very clear that when it comes to the cost of power in this country, it's not a technical issue. We can produce enough power.
Yes.
In fact, if you go to Britain today, you are going to Heathrow Airport and you look at the sea, you find wind turbines that they have put in the sea instead of oil rigs, because they are very big on renewable. So we can do the same in our lakes, in our oceans, and produce enough power. So power is not a problem. We have geothermal, and we can talk of wind farms. The same country, UK, has a lot of wind farms. So producing power is not an issue. I think the issue is regulation. The issue is the laws that we have to govern the power sector. And we can borrow from the financial sector. Remember what Central Bank did when we came with M-Pesa. They made sure that the regulatory framework was very good, that we did not see M-Pesa as a threat to the banking sector. In fact, banks started becoming agents of M-Pesa, and the rest is history. So if we can borrow from financial sector and make regulation framework very good for the power sector, I see no reason why it cannot flourish like other sectors. And I don't understand why we find it so hard to do something as simple as changing the rules and regulations, because that seems to be the bottleneck in the energy sector. It's not production, it's not the distribution. And finally, I like the way Kiton put it, that we need to be more broad-minded, that if we have to achieve one of the big four, manufacturing and industrialization, we need to go beyond power sector. We need to go beyond power. You have to think about the cost of land. You have to think about the cost of labor. You have to think about the national image. And I must add too much politics. I think the time we focused more on what matters to an ordinary Kenyan on the streets, the amount of money in the pocket, not just politics.
There are a lot of sources of power. Solar, it's given. You go to these countries, wind, it's given. You go to Austria, as you're landing, you see all these things turning. Had opportunity with Kiprono to move away from Slovakia to Austria. On the way, you get amazed of these turbines. So the power here, and when we were looking at the housing bill, it's never saw the light of the day. One of the things we say that any house being built, particularly in urban areas, there must be opportunity for solar. So I think the issue of power is not an issue. Turkana, bring so much in the Garissa, as you're talking about. Forget even the issue of hydro. In fact, hydro, you're better off buying from Omo, which will be cheaper from Ethiopia than actually going to it because of the drought. But we have other opportunities. Waste. Durban is producing a lot of power through waste. So the production is there. I think we need to step back and be genuine to ourselves and really look at what does it, and I think we need to take it further, Diba. What does it mean for farms to get into production, manufacture more? It translates creating opportunities, what Kip was saying. Look, if I have some resources, what's the first thing I would do, particularly if I'm Mohindi or I'm Kikuyu? I'll do flats. I'll do flats. How many people do you employ in that flat? 3. If I do that a Kiwanda, how many people shall we employ? So there's also that manufacturing and the wisdom of the Jubilee government getting as one of the big 4. It is its impact in the whole economy. That's it. And therefore, if it can't, and I've already said, government has a responsibility to facilitate and make entrepreneurs do what they are good at. In fact, I say government should not have anything to do with investing in manufacturing, but should look at the power, infrastructure, and all that. Because it impacts the mwananchi. It's amazing as you drive here, you see how many people are going to the industrial area. At the end of the day, they're taking something home.
And they're walking.
And they're walking. In fact, they're more strong than we are. I try to catch up with them, I can't. But what comes to me is, at the end of the day, there's something on the table. On the end of the day, a kid is going to school. That's the bottom line when we address manufacturing. And as government, we need to step back. I said, these are the drivers. How do we make it easier? Go down here, the road, the cement making areas. There's a certain mixer here, I can't remember its name. They have to import because of the cost of power. Those are areas we really need to look at and really appreciate what it means in terms of changing the narrative of the poor people here.
Right, Kiprono, I had promised to actually wind it up, but the question of also the geothermal development company and KenGen, broaden my understanding, because I'm given to understand geothermal is meant to also be drilling this geothermal wells, as it were, distribute that to KenGen. So what is the sole function of KenGen at the end of the day, if we are given to understand they in Ethiopia drilling these particular geothermals at the end of the day? Do we have duplication of functions here from these parastatals? Keep
on geothermal resource extraction in this country. And KenGen, on the other hand, also has a similar mandate, but also deals with all the other energy sources. I mean, KenGen is involved with the hydros. KenGen is involved in more than one energy source. I don't think there's duplication. I think that Geothermal Development Corporation was actually was specifically mandated with extracting geothermal from the various sources and seeking partnerships, which they have successfully done, and seeking funding options from African Development Bank, like they have done in Olkaria and etc. But having said that, I think that it is clearly apparent, and I think even if you look at the fact that KenGen is a listed company, its governance is perhaps a notch higher, and that's why we always have been advocating for the states to list more state-owned enterprises, because they are then subjected to the governance requirements, and there's also limited political interference because it's a listed company with other stakeholders and shareholders. And I could say arguably that KenGen has probably done better at geothermal extraction than GDC, which was purpose-built for that activity. So for me, I want to use this as an opportunity to advocate for more listing of state-owned enterprises, because it's a clear example here of why that is of greater benefit to our economy.
So if GDC and KenGen is performing better than GDC, why then do we have GDC below Kero? If we know that particular extraction of the work is being carried out by KenGen, then why are we, from the exchequer and the taxes that we're paying, we the taxpayers, why should we have GDC at the end of the day?
No reason. I think governments sometimes do very silly things, and some of those things are done for no reason, really, because as he says, KenGen actually was able to raise and does raise money from the capital markets through bonds they have done. I mean, it's a more, so GDC it was created, I think, to probably, in my view, to focus more on the issue of geothermal more than anything else, to create that focus. But it doesn't. It's not alone. There are many government institutions where there's this kind of duplication of roles, very very similar. Even when KETRACO was formed, by the way, I mean it was doing more or less what Kenya Power and Lighting was doing, evacuating power from the source and distribution of power, basically, except it's not selling directly to the consumer. But so I think the issue is. Energy is an area where the government does not really need to invest a lot of money. There are many players out there in the energy sector who already. Finance to the energy sector is one of the most really available. And so if the government wanted to exploit the vast opportunities for geothermal we have in this country, it doesn't even need to spend its own money. They can get into so many partnerships to generate that kind of power. But again, we've seen situations where we're spending tens of billions every year. It's been allocated for to all these institutions, and some of them have performed. We've seen the example of KETRACO. What happened in in that arrangement with the wind energy company in Marsabit, and how the government, how the Kenyans lost a lot of money. So I think state corporations generally are not necessarily the most efficient, but where we have got an institution like one that is partly, have gone as public. Some of the shares have been sold publicly, like Kengen, and they can mobilize resources directly, so that you don't need to really create. But I think we have seen in the last 10, 15 years an attempt to try and get back more state institutions. And this has happened in many sectors, particularly in the infrastructure area, and creating so many. If you go to roads, there are 4 or 5 different authorities. Kengen, they're called Kora, Kenha, KRB, you list them. Water is the same with so many. You can't even understand what is Water Trust, Water Resource Board, water, so many. And the same thing with so a government creates all these state corporations to create jobs, at the end of the day, for those who, have assisted them in their campaigns. So, but I agree with you. It's probably not, it's not necessary to have all these institutions doing overlapping in their roles one way or the other.
And I think one of the key elements that can be of President Uhuru's legacy as well is to implement Abdulkadir's recommendation on the parastatal reforms, that at least we should have 42 parastatals either being dissolved or merged at the end of the day, because we have all these duplications that they're there. But that particular report since 2013 is still gathering dust. Professor Iraki, is it a high time that we should maybe take it off the shelves and try and streamline the parastatal sector to see this dissolving of parastatals, that where we have duplications, that some of them are moribund, they don't serve any purpose. Like Biro is saying, looking at the water sector, there's so many facets of them, you wonder which is which.
I think Pirukera is very right on that there are a lot of parastatals or state-owned enterprise that can be merged. That makes a lot of economic sense, but does not make a lot of political sense. You remember, if you are going to be the head of state from August, and you have heard them talk openly, that if you're not going to vie for this post, we are going to give you a job. And those contenders they're not going to give you a job in Safaricom or in Kenya Breweries or in listed company. You get jobs in government-owned enterprises. Mm-hmm. So there is a very good economic reason why we should merge parastatals, because the money saved through those parastatals will be put in development, will be put in sectors that have the highest returns for the economy. But because of political expediency, that is why parastatals have not been merged. And I can tell you, I'll be very surprised if they will be merged after August 2019 or 2022, after the polls. Most likely they will not be merged. Maybe somebody will revisit that task force, talk about it, but it's very unlikely.
But I wish the new task force carry out the same exercise.
Probably.
Yes.
But I wish we thought more like economists than politicians. But the reality is, sometimes political expedience takes over from economic stuff.
But I agree with you. But at what expense, really?
Let's pursue very expensive the economy.
Let's pursue a political agenda at the expense of a socio-economic agenda. What is the downside of that? It's right. You take education, where we come with him. Yeah? Take water, health, any you can. And Abkadil, really. We spent a lot of time in that report with Abkadil and the whole team working on it. IMF tried to pick it last year. I think they went halfway. But I think we probably have to make decisions which are beneficial to the Mwananchi.
That's true.
Because the downside is it's what is really happening in Sri Lanka. And I don't want to be that. What happened in Tunisia. That's the downside if we don't take a political and a socio-economic decisions.
Thank you. Right, thank you. Kiprono Kitone mentioned KRA, and we want to gravitate our discussion even as we're winding up right now towards, of course, the tax regime. And KRA, recently, of course, we heard from the finance minister saying that it will transform to Kenya Revenue Service. But there's a very interesting also aspect to this as well, because KRA right now is seeking to utilize the unmanned aircraft system to bolster its tax surveillance in the country. You imagine that you have a drone hovering around your business premises, right? They have moved into a service. They are here actually to survey how, of course, you're doing your business there and whether you'll be remitting the requisite taxes at the end of the day. This is part of the agency's measure to increase tax surveillance. In March, of course, 2022, KRA also proposed to install surveillance cameras in all alcohol factories. So they plan to use the drones to scrutinize business across the country and smoke out tax cheats. The authority has invited bids from qualified suppliers to test and implement aerial tax surveillance for businesses. Aerial tax surveillance. Kiprono Kitoni. And when you talk about privacy, and of course you have that drone hovering over your premises at the end of the day because they're suspecting you of your tax cheats, what do you make of this? And they've moved into a service. Does this really fly in the face of the Kenya Revenue Authority? Because I think that the drone really falls within the remit of the authority than the service.
No, I think I have to make a very balanced statement with regard to KRA. You see, on the one hand, it is a significant competitive advantage for Kenya that we've been able to create an economy where taxes are paid. Many countries in Africa, and indeed many frontier nations of the world, have had a challenge in being able to transition themselves from being recipients of foreign aid to countries that are able to use their own resources to collect taxes from the enterprises and from the people in that country. And in that regard, KRA has been very successful. However, I think for me that we need to look at this as a bigger problem that as a country we face. Mm-hmm. The problem that we are facing is, one, over taxation, and two, massive overregulation of enterprise. And you see that in itself is killing the golden goose. So you see, if you hold one's neck so tight that he's unable to breathe, then he cannot be able to be productive. So you see, we are now, I mean, I am completely against the use of drones by KRA. I'm completely against intrusiveness, of these new measures that they're introducing. When I was the president of the Chamber of Commerce, we actually carried out a survey and we had a memorandum of understanding with the KRA. And the KRA at that time was a very stakeholder-facing and a very collaborative agency of government. And what we found in all the 47 counties of Kenya is that the people of this country are inclined and they want to and they like paying taxes. What they don't want is overtaxation and massive overregulation. And I've talked about these things very many times. So we are actually in a situation now where enterprise cannot operate profitably. And when enterprise cannot operate profitably, then they cannot contribute taxation. They cannot create employment. They cannot participate effectively in the markets. That's why you can, and I talk again about the balance of trade. If you look at our balance of trade with our traditional partners, Kenya is in a situation where we have more negative balance of trade figures, even with Uganda next door. So you see, we need to ask ourselves these very, very hard questions. But I am against those new measures. I don't think they are going to help us. I think it's just going to create more discouragement by enterprise in trying to move forward to do the things that they are set out to do. In conclusion, KRA used to be a very stakeholder-facing entity. But because of the overhead structure that was brought in by the new constitution, the amount of money that we need to run this country is just far too much. So KRA has no option but to come up with all these measures to try and draw juice out of a fruit that is already dry. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, Bill Okero, you agree and hold with the view of Kiprono Kitoni? You think they are overplaying their hands?
No, I don't think. Of course, I share some of his views, but on the fact that it's the government overheads that are responsible for it, I don't think so. I think when you look at government expenditure budget of 3.3 trillion, what goes to the entire devolution is about 300-something billion. It's less than 10%. That's not the reason. The reason is the huge, legacy, if you will, projects, you call them, that have been put in, which have, you borrowed money, and now we are going to pay out of that 3.3 trillion, 1.4 trillion is going to be, you have to service debts. I think it's poor, investments that have not yielding any returns to the economy. But I think KRA, if you look at the KRA charter, really, what they're trying to do flies in the face of the objectives of that charter, which is really to try and project KRA as an entity that is supposed to facilitate business, at the same time encourage businesses to pay their taxes. And when this charter came in, I remember in 1992, before 1992, there was no self-assessment of taxes. KRA used to determine, the tax authority used to determine how much you should pay. Now you have a system where it is the business that decides through its self-assessment returns, based on the audited accounts, how much tax is supposed to pay. And KRA, based on the law, they pick up, on random basis, examine institutions and see whether they actually have complied, and those assessments are actually in line with what they are supposed to pay, or their taxable position, tallies with what they have been filed in their returns. But I think to try and, they have said we are going to put intelligence people in companies, spy on what's going on in the company. They are going to put these drones. They are going to, they have said so many things which are very harsh, very harsh. And the president, I remember 2-3 years ago when he was speaking at the annual function where they award the taxpayers, he warned KRA against becoming too punitive. And to the point where when a KRA person comes in, somebody jumps out of the window. And we don't want to create that kind of, he said we don't want that kind of situation where we are seen as, you want a situation where people, and that can be done if the issues that Kiprono said will be addressed. Make taxes affordable so that institutions feel comfortable in paying. But what is happening now, in addition to what the law requires, there's also quite a bit of arbitrariness. Now, if you go to KRA investigation department, you find DCI, you find they have cells. You've reached a point where this thing is being weaponized, and I think it's not going to be good for KRA. You'll discourage investors. You'll discourage people who are genuinely paying taxes. You remember when they tried to come up with the 1% minimum tax? It was going to, punish those who are generally paying taxes, or are making genuine losses, because businesses make losses and profits. So I think KRA needs to move away from anything that would, project it as a very negative, very forceful military kind of institution, and try and encourage businesses to be business, so that at the end of the day, those are the guys who generate the money.
Indeed.
You have to give them opportunity to make money, so that they can pay taxes.
Indeed. Militarized, very invasive at the end of the day. Excellent, Iraqi. Briefly.
A few months ago, we saw Keroche being closed by KRA because they could not pay taxes. And I think if you talk to a group of business people, entrepreneurs in this country, and ask them, what do you fear most? They'll probably talk about KRA. And I think KRA should be facilitative. I don't think Kenyans are refusing to pay taxes. Most Kenyans are willing to pay taxes. And you saw that happen during President Kimaki's regime. Tax revenues went up. What Kenyans want to see is what you do with your taxes. If you show us what you do with the taxes, we'll be more than willing to pay taxes. And I think KRA is going to an extreme. I don't want to be when I'm sitting in my house, I see a drone hovering around, telling my visitors, please wait until this drone goes away. I think I'm a farmer, and I know one of the best ways to get milk from a cow is to play music to the cow. So I don't understand why KRA is not playing music to the taxpayers, so that you don't need to fight to be antagonistic with taxpayers. They pay taxes, and it is their obligation. But I don't think you need to be that militaristic when it comes to people paying taxes, taking people to sales, and so on. After all, KRA does not produce any revenue themselves. We produce tax revenues on behalf of KRA, so they should be friendly to us. And I think they are right. They want to expand the tax bracket so that more people pay taxes. And as somebody said a few years ago, we share the burden. So if we are too militaristic, this is what is going to happen. And I saw this happen in Mississippi. One county was very aggressive in terms of getting taxes from the residents. And what they do? They moved to the neighboring county. So the people who were left had to pay higher taxes, so more people left. So the county was left with no tax revenues. So if we become too aggressive, you'll find investors and manufacturers go to the neighboring countries that have better tax revenues or tax regimes. Because when you pay that 30% of your revenues or profit to KRA, it's a lot of money. So if you can get a place where you can get 10% less and you are producing 1 billion every year or having a profit 1 billion every year, that's a lot of money. So I think I have no problem with KRA trying to get more tax revenues from us, but the approach should not be like a movie from the novel 1984 by George Orwell. It should be more friendly.
Prof, lastly, as we're winding up.
The little thing I know about drones is not really going for checking for taxes. It's for delivery. You know, it's more progressive. But I think
in war.
Yeah, and he's right that we need to change the narrative to Kenya Revenue, and I hope they can be an advisory. I think they can get more to their advisory service. If it's Keroche, why is the problem with your business? You know, we are partnering in this and make it grow. The whole thing is to make business grow, because if the business grow, they'll pay more taxes. And I think the other thing is perhaps we need to get out to convince the Kenyans that your tax is very well being used, because that's the bottom line. We actually feel that our taxes are not well being used. The KRA is also, and government are very weak. We are very weak in terms of saying your taxes were this, these are public goods we have done, like roads. There's a lot of taxation money going to roads. How can we bring that narrative? And I'm challenging the lady Wandera, Grace in KRA, move to that level now of showing the Kenyans what taxes can do. That way people will actually go back. I think the question is, any government, I've said this before, any government feels that it can increase revenue by taxing people more is a very lazy government. How let's get into getting those people who are not paid, but convince them paying taxes is good for this country. And I think that's where I like now they are coming more from an authority to a service or advisory. They can do more by giving that opportunity. Go to breweries, go to SMEs, which we don't pay a lot of taxes. Tell them what it means. You can now get the power. The same discussion we had today. If I can get the power because I'm paying taxes at a reasonable price, if I can drive my goods to the market because there's a road, then I'm not paying to pay taxes. There are institutions where they charge you 65%, and they're happy to pay. Because you look at health, you look at medical, you look at infrastructure, you can see what it's doing. So I think we need to pick that narrative. He is spot on. You remember last week, Friday, we were talking. One of the King Waweru did when he was there is they actually partnered with government and say, our business, make people see, pay their taxes. If you have arrears, if you haven't paid, then it's find a flexible way of dealing with that. Right now, everybody in this country is actually thinking June for pay. I remember when I was in the US, 30th of April, was it 30th or 1st of April?
It was that, yes.
30th,
Yeah, 30th.
30th of April. It was like, I must pay my taxes because it's good for the country.
And you got your refund on the spot.
You got your refund. I used to get refund because I was supporting cancer patients. As a student, I was supposed to cancer student, but I used to get a refund, a rebate, if you wish, from the authority in the US. So if we can actually engineer ourselves, let's leverage on technology, not drones, technology where people are not paying, and areas where we have leveraged on technology, we see that going up. But the utilization of that has become extremely important.
Right, thank you. Kiprono Kitoni, your headline thoughts briefly, 30 seconds.
Me?
Yeah, headline thoughts, we're winding up.
For me, what I just say is that we need to move into this electioneering period with great confidence that our economy, our democracy is maturing. We need to closely watch what's going on in the global economy and the likely impact it will have on our economy here. We have supply chain issues in many countries. You can see the number of ships that are queuing in the port of Shanghai have a direct impact on us. But more than anything else, I think those in the political leadership of this country must remember that the public are watching them. And all their actions, will have an equal and opposite reaction by the public. So leaders, please live up to your calling. And remember that the public are your children. So let's see a great display of maturity at our leadership level.
Right, well said. Let's hear from Bill Okero briefly.
Yeah, for me, I think the major concern is the economy. You see what is happening today, particularly in the exchange rate. Last week, our business, we bought the dollar at 118.5, and even then it was rationed. We could not get all our requirements for our imports. And so if the government really needs to be more concerned about, because what will happen is that their own debt is going to go up significantly if the shilling goes further down the road. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, I think you'll find capital flight out of the country. I mean, if the shilling loses value, then you would expect the challenges in many businesses, and the cost of living will go up because we rely on our imports are now at 4 or 5 times our exports. Mm-hmm. And so I think the government needs to be more cautious about the economy, even at this time when they're busy with